You're listening to Dodge Movie Podcast. Your hosts are Christy and Mike Dodge, the founders of Dodge Media Productions. We produce films and podcasts, so this is a podcast about films. Join them as they share their passion for filmmaking.
Welcome back, everybody, to Dodge Movie Podcast. Merry Christmas. In a couple days, everybody will be sitting around their Christmas tree opening their presents, and here is our present to you. We are going to talk about the 1954 classic White Christmas, directed by Michael Curtiz, who is known for Casablanca and Robin Hood. It was written by Norman Krasna and Melvin Frank. Before we get started, I just want to let you know how much we appreciate you guys listening to our podcast this year. And as a present to you, we have created a free PDF that if you're interested, it lists on one sheet all of the films that we watched, that we talked about, we watched and talked about this year, as well as we have finally settled on all the films for 2022. And we're happy to share that with you if you want to get started or just know what we're talking about. Maybe guess the themes because I didn't put it on there. And I'm happy to send that out to anybody who is interested. Just shoot me an email at Christy and I should spell Christy. It's CHRISTI at dodgemediaproductions.com. That's always in the show notes. Also, please always like us, rate us, review us, share us with a friend. We're growing our audience and we love it and we love to hear from you. So if you want to give us a call and leave a review, we'll play it on air at 971-245-4148. That will also be in the show notes and we really appreciate it. So let's get started. White Christmas stars Bing Crosby, Kaye, Rosemary Clooney, and Vera-Ellen, among others. Irving Berlin wrote all the songs for this film. This is a Paramount Studios film. This was the first picture that Paramount Pictures did in VistaVision, which had a higher resolution. And films in the 50s, I was just telling Cameron this last night, the TV came out, it became more affordable for families to have a TV. And so a lot of families weren't going to the movies. And so studios had to create a reason to bring people back to the theaters. And they created things like Cinescope and VistaVision. And so it was a higher resolution. It had sometimes more saturated colors. And it just, they could argue that you're going to get a better quality than your black and white TV at home. So please come back. And VistaVision was the testing grounds for cinematography ideas that evolved into 70 millimeter IMAX and Omnimax film formats in the 70s. And both IMAX and Omnimax are oriented in the sideways fashion like VistaVision was. So there's a little film history for y'all. Oh, and this was fun. Paramount dropped the format after only 7 years, although for another 40 years, the format was used by European and Japanese producers for film features, and American films such as the first 3 Star Wars films were filmed in this higher resolution special effects type way of doing things. So there you go. You've been educated. The synopsis for the film is a successful song and dance team becomes romantically involved with a sister act and team up to save a failing Vermont inn of their former commanding general. The tagline is, first, an unforgettable film in VistaVision, thus why you got the lesson. And another one was the most fabulous music and mirth show in motion picture history, in all caps on the original printed ad. Joyous entertainment for every season, any year, which is true. And I'll just take this quick moment to say that the reason we picked this, besides it being a family favorite in our home, I remember being a kid and my parents, or my Uncle Bud and my mom watching this, and I kind of rolled my eyes because I didn't get it. And now I cannot let a Christmas go by without watching this because it really, truly reminds me of the Christmas season and the Christmas spirit and my uncle and my mom. Thank you, listener Sandy Service. Mike, what's our pickup line?
What's this all about, Captain? And in this case, Captain is played by Bing Crosby, kind of the lead in the film. He sings a song called White Christmas, probably his most famous Christmas song at least. And I think you could argue that his Christmas album called White Christmas is the greatest Christmas album of all time. So this one is all about Bing.
Right. And it kind of is in that spirit of like the USO, even though they themselves are amongst the military, like officers fighting, right? They're not part of the entertainment crew. Is that correct?
That's certainly correct for the Danny Kaye character, who is a private. Bing Crosby as a captain, you would think would be commander of some sort. Danny Kaye has some dialogue where he establishes that Bing Crosby's character is a big performer, Bob Wallace, outside of the Army, but we never really find out what he's doing. Now, one of the clues we have is that the general and the other troops have bloused their pants into their boots, so they're airborne troops. And the era would be probably Battle of the Bulge. So it would be startling for an entertainer to be on the front lines like that. So presumably Bing Crosby's character, Bob, had a kind of a wartime job, not an entertainment job.
Mm-hmm. Kind of reminiscent of Elvis, but this predated Elvis. So.
Correct.
Yeah. So then they sing a song for the outgoing general. It's called The Old Man, and it has this great refrain, wherever he wants to go, we will go because we love him, which I thought was interesting because I wouldn't think that a group of military men would, sing their love for, I could see admire because we'll fight for him. But I thought it was interesting that, kind of like, because we love him, we love him.
Right. So one of the notes I have is this film was shot, principal photography was 8 years after the war ended.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there's probably a certain appreciation that we lack, not having gone through the war, that I think audiences at the time and soldiers at the time maybe found that would be reasonable, right? That a commanding officer that would take care of them, they would say that.
That makes so much sense. Thank you for that perspective. That's right. You talked about that when we watched it. How was this movie received in 54 versus now? Because like you said, there's so much distance from the war, but in 54, it was still so new. So
yeah,
right on, Mike. So then there's some fighting. There's a brick wall that comes down and Danny Kaye's character swoops in and pushes Bing Crosby's character out of the way. And the cut to them in the, what do you call the tent? Like not the mess tent, because that's where they eat, right? In like the medic tent, I guess.
Yeah.
And so they're talking about, oh, it's a good thing I saved your life. And Danny Kaye rubs his arm, which sets up like a film long throwback kind of. They keep coming back to that. Every time Danny Kaye wants Bing Crosby's character to do something, he starts rubbing his arm.
Right. And he talks about how much the arm was injured in saving him.
Right. So he's really trying to convince Bob Wallace, Bing Crosby's character, to go on a tour and become an act so that the two of them can travel the world. And, I think in a way he wants to kind of, in the best kind of way, kind of ride Bob Wallace's, because Bob Wallace doesn't need Danny, what's his character?
Phil Davis, I think.
Phil Davis. He doesn't need Phil because he's successful on his own. But Phil sees that, if I pair myself with Bob Wallace, I can make it, right? So he's really trying to convince him. And he does, because then we see a large number of the Variety newspaper announcing the act and then announcing where it's going and announcing that it's sold out. And so it's a great montage to show that the two of them are successful. And at the same time, the instrumental Blue Skies plays underneath. That's the montage of the newspaper. And then rolls into, I think, a scene of them performing Blue Skies. At one point, Phil tries to get them dates and Bob Wallace wants no part of it. He's all business. And so they fight about it a little bit. And that's where we first see that it's Danny Kaye's intention that they find mates and they settle down and they have children and they have like a real life, not this, they've done their touring as military men and now they've done their touring as performers, but it's time to start settling down. And so they're fighting about it.
There's a line there where Bob Wallace says, "Go to Smith, she couldn't even spell it." Because Danny Kaye's character, Phil, is so aggressive about providing dates for Bob. And I was curious to see kind of your take on it, because I thought that Phil came across as kind of a bit of a womanizer, not so much looking for a wife as looking for a good time with the ladies.
Well, I think that he definitely, I think in the short term, like all young people, you're looking to couple up. So I definitely think that he wanted to pair up with a couple of ladies, but not in a lecherous way. Just like I said, at that time, in that era, how somebody, would want to, I guess I keep repeating myself, but just couple up. Does that make sense?
It makes sense.
I don't think he just wanted to hook up.
It landed a little differently for me. That's all I can say.
Okay. All right. Because I thought he mentioned, we need to settle down. And I wouldn't think if all he wanted was a hookup, he wouldn't talk about finding, because this was the 50s. They were, you wanted to find a good girl.
Well, except that at the end of the film, when his character has to pretend to be engaged to the Vera-Ellen character, he seems very marriage phobic at that point. So that's maybe supporting it, but not important right now.
Okay. Remember, I live in a happy space in my head. So the women of the film, Rosemary Clooney and what's her name?
Vera-Ellen.
Vera-Ellen. They have a brother who served with them. And we find out later that Vera-Ellen sent Wallace and Davis a letter telling them that they wanted them to come see him perform. Would you go see my sisters perform? But then we find out that Vera sent the letter. And so they go see it. And that's when we see the great number Sisters performed by Rosemary Clooney and Vera-Ellen. And one of our other listeners sent me that her daughters were part of an equestrian team and they do something called working pairs where you ride your horses in synchronized to music. And her daughters performed to Sisters, and they even put the blue fans on the horses and a blue tuft on their head, kind of hearkening back to this scene because they also love White Christmas. And she did mention The Grinch. They like Christmas Vacation, Elf, and The Grinch are some of their other favorites. So thank you to Adrian for sharing that with us. And so this is a classic scene. It's one of my favorite songs from the film. And later, Bob Wallace and Phil Davis kind of mimic the sisters. They're trying to buy him some time to get out, and they dress up. I think it's funny how they pull up their pant legs into their way up past their knees.
And I think you get to see their sock garters.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. So they buy the girls some time to evade, and Phil gives their train tickets to the girls, and none too pleased is Bob Wallace when they get on the train and he discovers they have no tickets.
And then Phil is trying to convince him to go past New York to Vermont. And Bob doesn't know why, but it's because Phil is chasing these two dames. So,
right.
And neither of them at this point know that the inn that they're going to end up at in Vermont happens to be run by their former general, the old man of the opening song.
Yes, the beloved general that they loved. I was going to ask you, because then Phil and Vera's character work to get Bob and Betty together, Rosemary Clooney's character and Bing Crosby. They want them to connect. And so they set up all these different times when they can be together. And so at one point, I can't remember how Vera does it, but she sends Betty to get a snack. And so Bob's playing the piano and she's playing the piano and he leans in behind her, kind of like the pool shark move, like when a girl's shooting pool and the guy leans over on top of her to kind of show her how to shoot the pool, but it's really just an excuse to, touch a girl.
Cop a feel.
Yeah. And so I thought it was cute. So is under the definition of a romantic comedy, does this one check the boxes?
That is a fantastic question. Off the top of my mind, I would say it does have some of the things, right? Because I think we could argue that.
Right. I would say so. That's what I thought.
Mm-hmm. It's got musical numbers too, which is nice. Not required by a rom-com, but it's good to have.
So I think this is a romantic comedy. There is a bit of a misunderstanding, and Betty leaves on the train because she misheard. She thought that Bob was using them, that he was going to leave and go kind of on his own again. And so she leaves and is that what she misunderstands? Or is it because
she thinks that he's using the show, which is supposedly the Ed Sullivan show, that he's trying to bring the crew there and trick people into doing the show, when in reality he's going to travel to New York City to do press for the show to help out the general. So early on, when he finds out that the letter from freckle-faced Haynes, the dog-faced boy, their brother, was forged, he says, well, everybody's got an angle. It's okay. So Betty thinks he's working an angle and he's taking advantage of them. And so she decides to boogie, to go back and take a job in New York City.
Right. And so she doesn't tell her sister. She just says, you'd be better off with Phil. I'm going to leave and go to New York City. And while she's there, she does this number in this all black gown with silver sparkly gloves with 4 handsome dancers who are sporting the Steve Jobs look with the black turtlenecks in front of a pink gauzy curtain. And it was just like, oh my gosh, I've seen this before.
Right.
Only I know that Marilyn Monroe did it after this movie came out. So I just can't believe that one didn't influence the other. It just seems too close. And she's singing the song, You Done Me Wrong. And at first she tries to tell the stage director, I don't want to sing this song. And we're kind of like, why? And then, but she knows Bob is in the audience.
I would like to ask the costume designer, what's up with the rhinestone tramp stamp on the back of her dress? It is literally a design right where the tramp stamp would go at the base of the spine. No clue where that came from. Don't think I've ever seen a dress that has bedazzling right there.
Yeah, except for, I mean, that would be curious if there is a history of kind of, because I think that's where the bustle always was.
Yeah, there's a bustle. I've just never seen a rhinestone bustle.
Right, right.
Which sounds like a cool band name. There are some humorous lines that come in here. I think one of them is, once you get to know him, he's almost endurable, right?
Who is that in reference to?
I now I can't remember, did Phil or Bob say that? It was a good line, though. They said, though, that a lot of the character of Bob's kind of clever or unique turns of phrase came out of Bing Crosby's own particular vocal style. So they obviously twiddled some dialogue to make that work. But things like she couldn't even spell Smith, things like that. He's supposed to be kind of a little bit sharp-witted like that, which is funny because I think we would probably associate Danny Kaye as being more the comic actor. There are several dance numbers in there, which is amazing. Nice long takes, really impressive that the dancers and the actors who are dancing could actually, pull that off without having to have lots of really quick Michael Bay style cuts. Although I did hear that Danny Kaye was a late cast. They had originally, I think it was Donald O'Connor. They had another actor in mind. And so some of the dance numbers were by the Denny Terrio looking guy. And I think it was because it was late in the process and Danny Kaye wasn't able to learn the dances fast enough to do all of them. So there's a little bit of that involved.
You like that one number, and I do too. But shortly after they meet, Phil and Vera do one. And you had either done some research or you just noticed that it's one long scene. Like there's no cuts. There's one cut, I thought.
Yeah, there's one or two cuts maybe, but it is one just long shot. It's really quite impressive. But speaking of that shot, it reminds me, you mentioned the VistaVision. I love the saturation in this film. And especially when you notice that Wallace and Davis, they often have shoes and socks that match the color of their suit instead of just black, right? Mm-hmm. They're light blue or whatever. And you really see that. The cinematography is, of course, really fun. They've got a couple long tracking shots, kind of bookending when at the beginning of the film, the general is walking through the crowd of soldiers when he's kind of given his last speech to them. Mm-hmm. And then at the end, when they do the performance at the end, right, the camera comes back across the crowd of all the people, all the former soldiers of this general who'd shown up to boost the economy of his inn. And I said to you, like, how did they do that shot? Because they come over the crowd, and so you can tell there's no way for them to put dolly tracks. Mm-hmm. And I assume that was on some sort of crane. Maybe they had some sort of overhead rig of some sort. I don't know, but that was a neat shot that they got. And if I recall correctly from the trivia, I think the snow was asbestos back in the good old days.
No wonder Rosemary Clooney didn't make it very long.
That was it. I had actually a fair number of costume notes in here. And one thing that I thought was interesting is the character of Vera-Ellen Judy. Her dressing gown and her pajamas have what I think they would call a Chinese style. If you notice.
Oh yeah, that Mandarin collar.
Yeah, and the ties instead of buttons. But at one point, Bob mentions a snood. And I looked that up, and my question was twofold. One, does anybody in our listening audience know what a snood is?
I know. I have a friend who calls her son that.
Well, okay. And then the other thing is, maybe at that time, was that a more common term? I don't know who could answer that, but I thought it was fine, but maybe at the time it was completely acceptable, but it would bump me now. When she goes down to get the sandwich in the middle of the night, he's wearing dress slacks and a suit jacket. And I thought somebody who's, noodling on the piano after midnight maybe wouldn't be dressed that. But
do you ever see Bob or Phil in like relaxation wear?
No. You do actually see them kind of in their undergarments at one point where they're changing, but I made a note. It was clever use of the steamer trunk. They had the steamer trunk that he ships his clothes in tipped up on its small end.
Yeah.
And so it was able to block the camera from viewing his undercarriage.
But if somebody really wanted to, I saw a little bit of side cheek from Bing Crosby.
Oh, a little Bing cheek.
Yeah.
Right on.
Yeah.
That probably
Somebody's
helped in the
interested.
box office. Yeah.
I don't have the time code, so you're going to have to watch the whole movie.
Yeah, you're going to have to look that one up.
It's near the front. So what about head trauma? Was there any head trauma?
I did have one. I made note at 3610. He takes a hat box to the head when they're helping the girls kind of pack up their stuff as they scoot out the window.
To leave. And then I know there's quite a few smoochies.
Smoochy, smoochy, smoochy. There are several smoochies. I made note of 1 hour, 6 minutes, 58 seconds. Bob kisses Betty after the midnight snack and singing. And then at 1:58:38, he kisses her behind the Christmas tree in the middle of the White Christmas number.
And then he hucks the present she just gave him.
Oh yeah, it was just for comic effect. He tosses it. Some little kid got brained maybe, but I thought it was interesting. A veteran performer like him, yet he kisses her in the middle of a number.
Right. I know, it's almost like they run around behind the wall. Vera and Phil are dancing and singing, and let's cop a feel real quick.
Yeah, smooch, smooch. Okay, get back to the song. Yeah.
Right. Okay, so I noticed there was general driving Jeeps, but did you get anything else?
So I had a couple of things. Definitely that is very believable that the general would have purchased a surplus Jeep to drive around his Vermont inn. Had no problems with that. There is a train trip that figures in the plot, right? They end up in Vermont. And my question was, how long would that take? It's 1,200 miles from Florida to Vermont as the crow flies. And I don't know how fast those trains go. So if they went like 30 miles an hour, that would have been a 40-hour trip. That's a long, not an overnighter is kind of where I'm going.
Mm-hmm.
But maybe they had bullet trains back then. The biggest thing, though, is technically not really driving, but it's a vehicle thing.
Mm-hmm.
So near the end of the film, they have a cake for the big party for the general. And it's got a tank on top. Okay, fair enough. But you can tell from the gun barrel and the radio bustle that this is obviously an M4 Firefly, where they took a Sherman tank, which was made by the U.S., and they upgunned it with this British 17-pounder gun. Well, those almost exclusively were used by the British. They were upgunned by the British. So having that on his tank, I don't know. That's a little bit of a... I think the guys who served would know the difference between a standard Sherman and the Firefly. That's just my opinion. But I think... That's I need to have a word with the baker.
That reminds me of when we first moved here and I got you a cake and I had her do it in camo.
Oh, that was so fun.
And so I bought like a set of Army Men and it came with a tank.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it was your 30th birthday because we had friends over.
Yeah, sounds about right.
And one of our dogs, because I put the cake near the corner, the edge of the counter, not meaning to, but just because you set out all the food and you only have so much room. And so the dog started licking when we weren't looking the corner of the cake. And so we took the tank and we put it over that corner. And so I knew, well, not only to hide the missing frosting, but also to know, like, don't serve anybody this corner.
Right. So, by the way, that was not a Sherman tank. I think that was a Patton that we used to cover the corner. And I also believe that I ate that corner later.
I think you did.
Yeah.
You love your dogs.
I love my dogs and I love cake. So what are you going to do?
All right. So we go to the numbers.
Let's go to the numbers.
Okay. So this movie cost $2 million in 1954.
Which I looked up was a little bit more than the average budget of $1.5 million. So it wasn't a huge budget number.
Yeah, which is amazing because lots of stage productions, but it was filmed on the lot. Like all of the scenes were done on the Paramount lot. The only scene that wasn't was the train station scenes, and those were done at 20th Century Fox.
And didn't they reuse the sets from Holiday Inn?
I believe so, yes.
Yeah. So,
yes.
see, it's a good producer, saving money.
Yeah. So it didn't quite make, it didn't. It actually kind of bombed now that I'm looking at the numbers. Domestically, it made just under $1 million at $928,000, and worldwide, it only made a little over $1 million. So they lost money on this one, but I'm guessing if Paramount's probably still making money on, like selling it to Netflix, which you can see it now. And every year, I think you see it on Netflix, but I think they're doing okay. I think Paramount's going to land on their feet. I think this one was overall in the long game, a win for them.
So interesting side note, speaking though of dollars, is there's no official soundtrack for this because Rosemary Clooney at the time was under contract with Decca Records, and so they wouldn't allow her voice to be on the soundtrack. Correct.
But you can still get the music, just not on, there's not, like you said, an official soundtrack. The IMDb score is 7.6 out of 10. Rotten Tomatoes scores it 77%, and the audience gives it 88%. So a little bit what we would expect because it has become kind of part of Christmas. I know a lot of people say that they watch this, although I do know a couple people who say they've never seen it before. So please, if you're one of those, please go out and watch it. I think, just once, and then you can make your decision whether it becomes part of your annual rotation. It is 2 hours long. It's not rated, although I would say you could safely call it a G-rated movie.
Oh yeah, there's nothing in there that would,
even though you see a little side cheek from Bing, but just barely, and only if you're looking.
Right. And I will say you don't get to see any side cheek, but George Clooney's auntie is a hottie in this film.
Yes,
really.
She's a looker.
A looker. So you have that to look forward to, those of you who haven't seen the film yet.
Yeah, and like you were saying before, I think with the high saturation of the color, it's just a beautiful.
It's a gorgeous
film to watch.
Film. And great musical numbers and some dancing. It's got a lot in it.
All right, everybody. That is it for us. We hope that you all have a very Merry Christmas, a happy Kwanzaa. I hope you had a great Hanukkah. And we just cannot be more grateful to all of our listeners and all of you who supported us and engaged us, even if it was private texts. You shared it. Our numbers grew this year. We are having a blast. We are locked in for another year. So if you do want those movie lists, remember to email me and let me know that you'd like to see what we're going to talk about this next year and what we talked about last year. If you're interested, thank you so very much. And never forget,
Dodges never stop, and neither do the movies.
Thanks for listening to Dodge Movie Podcast with Christy and Mike Dodge of Dodge Media Productions. To find out more about this podcast and what we do, go to dodgemediaproductions.com. Subscribe, share, leave a comment, and tell us what we should watch next. Dodges never stop, and neither do the movies.